Most people planning retirement have heard the same advice at some point. Spend more in your early 60s, when you're still healthy enough to enjoy it. Save the slower pace for later. Go-go years first, no-go years last. It sounds reasonable. It is reasonable on the surface. The problem is not the idea. The problem is the timing, and one specific mechanism that almost nobody talks about when they're handing you a brochure and asking you to sign a drawdown illustration. I used to tell clients something similar. Enjoy it while your knees still work. Get the traveling done. The money will hold. Then I watched what happened to drawdown portfolios during the 2022 market falls. Not in theory, in practice. I had to completely rethink the way I model retirement finances after that. Because here is what the go-go model quietly assumes, that the markets will cooperate in your first 3 years of heavy withdrawals. And if they do not, if you are pulling £50,000 a year out of a shrinking pot, you can permanently damage a portfolio that would otherwise have survived for 30 years. Permanently. Not a setback you recover from later. The sequence of those early returns matters more than the average return over your lifetime. That is a sentence worth sitting with, because most projections do not show you that. They show you a smooth line upward. Life does not do smooth lines. This video is about 2 traps that catch intelligent, well-prepared people in their late 50s and early 60s. One is a market timing problem. The other is hiding inside one of the most trusted pensions in the country, and it has nothing to do with markets at all. Let's talk about what actually happened around 2022. It was not a simple story of the UK market falling 15%. The FTSE 100 actually finished 2022 slightly up, but many retirement portfolios still had a painful year because global equities, bonds and balanced funds were hit by rising inflation and interest rates. For someone still in accumulation, still paying into a pension, not drawing from it, that is uncomfortable but manageable. You ride it out. Time is on your side. For someone who had just retired and was drawing £50,000 a year to fund those go-go years, it was a different situation entirely. Here is the maths, and it is worth following slowly. You retire with £500,000 in a defined contribution pension, a decent pot. You have planned to take £50,000 in the first year, not because that is the classic 4% rule, because it is not. 4% of £500,000 would be £20,000. This is a much heavier go-go withdrawal, the kind people sometimes justify because they expect spending to slow down later. Year 1, the market drops 15%. Your pot falls to £425,000. Then you withdraw £50,000 for living costs. You are now sitting on £375,000. You have lost 25% of your total lifetime savings in 12 months. Not because you did anything wrong, because the sequence was wrong. Now here is the part people miss. To recover from £375,000 back to £500,000, you do not need the market to gain back 15%. You need a gain of about 33%. And that is before you take the next withdrawal. So the problem is not just the fall. It is the combination of a fall, a large withdrawal, and another withdrawal coming soon after. You are trying to fill a bath while the plug is out. The FCA has flagged this specifically in their guidance on drawdown risk. The concern is not that markets fall, they always recover eventually. The concern is that the order of those falls, concentrated right at the start of retirement, can permanently impair a portfolio that would otherwise have lasted decades. This is not a fringe risk. This is sequencing, and it is built into the structure of drawdown itself. Completely not your fault for not seeing it coming. The financial industry sold most people a spreadsheet showing 5% average annual growth, steady as a metronome. That is not how markets behave. Markets have bad years. Sometimes bad years happen to arrive exactly when you have just stopped working and started spending. So what do you do when the sequence turns against you? The instinct is to stop withdrawing, but your bills do not pause because the FTSE has had a rough quarter. Council tax still arrives in April. The energy bill still lands in January. You pull the money because you have to. What protects you is not predicting when markets will fall. Nobody does that reliably. What protects you is making sure you are not forced to sell units at a loss just to cover ordinary living costs. That is the mechanism. That is the whole game. And if sequencing risk were the only problem, this would be manageable. There are ways to buffer against it, and we will get to those. But right now, in 2026, there is a second force working against you at exactly the same moment, and it sits inside the UK tax system itself. There is a number worth knowing. As of the 6th of April 2026, the new state pension pays £241.30 a week. That works out to £12,547.60 a year. The personal allowance, the amount you can earn before paying income tax, is £12,570. It has been frozen by government policy for several years, and for 2026 to 2027 it is still not moving. Do the subtraction. £12,570 minus £12,547.60. You have £22.40 of tax-free space left in a year. That is not a rounding error. That is the actual gap between your state pension and your tax threshold, if you are drawing the full new state pension in 2026. What that means in practice, if you receive the full new state pension, is that almost all of your personal allowance is already used before you touch your private pension. The moment you take taxable income from a private pension, anything beyond tax-free cash, you may start paying income tax on it. In England, Wales and Northern Ireland, that usually means 20% first, and a large withdrawal can push part of the money into the 40% band. Scotland has different income tax bands, so the exact numbers can vary, but the squeeze is the same. The state pension rises, the allowance stays free, and private pension withdrawals become taxable much sooner than many people expect. So you are doing two things at once. You are selling units from your drawdown pot at whatever price the market offers, which, if timing is bad, is a reduced price, and you are handing 20 to 40 pence of every pound straight to HMRC before it reaches your bank account. This is what some advisors call the nutcracker effect. The state pension creeps upward each year under the triple lock. The personal allowance stays frozen, the gap between them closes, and every retiree drawing from a private pension gets squeezed from both sides simultaneously. Run the numbers on what that actually costs over time. Someone pulling an extra £30,000 a year from their pension, a reasonable go-go budget on top of state pension, pays around £6,000 a year in income tax they might not have fully anticipated. Over 5 years of go-go spending, that is £30,000 gone to tax alone. That is a car, that is a year of care costs, that is money that could have stayed invested and compounding. The pace at which your pot depletes is not just about how much you spend. It is about how much of what you withdraw actually reaches you. And right now, that gap is larger than most people realize when they sit down and plan their retirement income in their head. None of this means you should not retire. None of it means the go-go years are a bad idea. It means the timing and the structure of how you draw income matters enormously, and a flat withdrawal strategy that ignores sequencing and tax simultaneously is carrying more risk than the headline number suggests. Now, everything we have talked about so far applies to people with a defined contribution pension, the kind where the pot size fluctuates with markets and the risk sits entirely with you. But there is another group of people in their late 50s and early 60s who think they are completely insulated from all of this. Teachers, NHS staff, council workers, people with a defined benefit pension, a guaranteed income for life, index-linked, backed by the public sector. They are not in the market. They cannot be sequenced against. They are safe, except they are not. They are sitting in a different trap entirely, and this one is harder to see coming. Meet Richard, 62 years old, deputy head teacher at a secondary school in Yorkshire, 40 years in education. Richard has a teacher's pension. It is not a pot of money he can simply withdraw like a defined contribution pension. But if you tried to value the guaranteed inflation-linked income he has built up over 4 decades, The planning value could easily run into hundreds of thousands of pounds. That is the economic value of what he has earned from years of teaching leadership, marking books, and sitting through governors' meetings. He could have retired at 60, met the criteria, done the paperwork, walked away with a guaranteed index-linked income for the rest of his life. But his school was heading into an Ofsted inspection. He wanted to see it through. He loved the work, so he stayed on. 2 years later, at 62, Richard has a stroke. He dies while still an active member of the scheme, still on the payroll, still, in the language of pension administration, in service. His wife receives the death in service benefit. Under teachers' pension rules, that means a lump sum, roughly 3 times his pensionable pay, in his case around £150,000, and a reduced survivor's pension on top. A fraction of what his full retirement income would have been, but here is the part many people never compare properly. If Richard dies while still in pensionable service, his family does not receive the retirement income he would have drawn for himself. They receive the scheme's death in service benefits instead, usually a death grant, and any survivor's pension due under the rules. Those benefits can still be valuable, but they are not the same as Richard retiring, starting his pension, and then dying under the retirement rules. That is not a technicality buried in small print. That is how defined benefit schemes work. Different member status can mean different death benefit rules. If you die while still in pensionable service, your family is assessed under the active member rules. If you die after your pension has started, the retirement rules apply instead. Both sets of benefits can be valuable, but they are not the same, and assuming they are the same is where the danger begins. Now consider what might have happened if Richard had retired at 60. His pension would have started. If he had then died at 62, a different set of death benefit rules would apply. His spouse may still receive a survivor's pension, and if the pension had been in payment for less than 5 years, there may also be a supplementary death grant based on 5 times the annual pension, less pension already paid. The point is not that one column is always better. The point is that the 2 columns can be very different, and most people never ask to see them side by side. 2 years. That can be the difference between one set of death benefit rules and another. Not always better, not always worse, but different enough that you should never make the decision blind. I have watched this happen more than once, not in textbooks, in real conversations after the fact, when there is nothing left to restructure. The painful part is that Richard was not being reckless. He was being dedicated. He loved his school. He thought he had time. Most people in his position think the same thing, that staying on is safe, that the pension is safe, that the worst case is covered. But when you stay in active service with a DB pension, you are making a financial trade-off whether you realize it or not. You are using one of your most valuable assets, a guaranteed income stream worth hundreds of thousands of pounds, as collateral for a job you are choosing to keep doing. Until you claim the pension, the benefits your family receives are governed by the active member death rules, not by the retirement rules. That distinction matters. The scheme may still pay valuable benefits, but they may look very different from the benefits your spouse would receive if your pension had already started. Passion for your work is not a bad thing, but you cannot let it silently underwrite a risk you have never actually agreed to take. So why do people like Richard, smart, experienced, financially aware, not see this coming? It is rarely about the numbers. The numbers, once you lay them out, are fairly clear. It is something deeper than that. Here is something that does not show up in any pension projection. Ask someone in their late 50s whether they have enough money to retire, and a surprising number of them will say yes. They know the numbers. They have done the calculations, or at least a version of them. The pot is there. The income would work. Then ask them when they are actually planning to retire, and watch the answer change. Suddenly it is another year, maybe 2. There is a project to finish, a colleague who needs handover time, a restructure coming that they want to see through. There is always something. And underneath all of it, rarely said out loud but almost always present, is a quieter question. Who am I if I am not this? For people who have spent 35 or 40 years being the deputy head, the senior consultant, the branch manager, the job is not just a job. It is the shape of the week. It is the reason the phone rings. It is the thing that makes you useful, needed, competent. It is, in ways that are genuinely hard to articulate, a large part of who you are. I understand that feeling. I remember what it is like to open your inbox on a Monday morning and find it full of things that need you, problems that only you can sort. That is not a small thing to walk away from. The prospect of waking up on a Tuesday with nowhere to be, no one waiting on a decision, no meeting at 10, for a lot of people, that does not feel like freedom. It feels like disappearing, and so they stay. Not because the finances say stay, because the identity says stay. That is completely understandable. It is also, in the cases we have been discussing, quietly costing them a great deal. Because when the identity trap keeps you in active service past the point where retirement makes financial sense, particularly with a DB pension, you are not making a neutral choice. You are accepting a risk profile you have probably never had anyone lay out plainly in front of you. You are leaving your family's financial security contingent on nothing going wrong with your health in the next year or two. Retirement planning that ignores the psychology of stopping is incomplete planning. The maths without the identity question is only half the picture. The answer is not to force yourself out before you are ready. That rarely works, and it is not the point. The point is to separate two things that tend to get bundled together: the financial decision and the question of purpose. They are not the same decision. Treating them as one is what creates the delay. You can find structure, usefulness, and identity outside a job title. Most people who retire well have figured out what that looks like before they hand in their notice, not after. But you cannot use your pension as a holding position while you work that out. The financial clock does not pause while you sort the psychological one. What you can do, starting right now, without waiting, is take two very specific actions that protect you regardless of when you actually decide to retire. One for drawdown, one for DB. Neither of them requires you to make any final decisions today. Two actions, one for each situation, neither of them complicated. If you are in a defined contribution pension, a drawdown pot that moves with the market, the single most effective thing you can do right now is build what is sometimes called a cash buffer. The idea is straightforward. Before you retire, or early in retirement, you set aside somewhere between 18 months and 2 years of essential living costs in cash. Not invested, not in your pension. In a cash ISA or a high-interest savings account, somewhere liquid, somewhere safe, somewhere the FTSE cannot touch it. What does essential living costs mean in practice? Mortgage or rent if you still have it, council tax, energy bills, food, the basics that arrive whether the market is up or down. If you are spending around £2,500 a month on essentials, you are looking at a buffer of roughly £45,000 to £60,000 sitting in cash. That sounds like a lot to pull out of a working pot, but here is what it buys you. If the market falls in your first year of retirement, which it may, and which you cannot predict, you do not touch your pension. You live off the cash ISA. Your drawdown pot sits there. It does not get sold at a loss. It does not get permanently impaired. You simply wait. By the time your cash buffer runs low, you have bought yourself time. The market may have recovered, or it may not. But you have reduced the chance of being forced to sell immediately after a fall. You have not eliminated sequence risk. You have made it much less dangerous. This is not a new idea, but it is one that gets talked about far less than it should, particularly for people entering retirement in a high withdrawal, high tax environment like 2026. Now, if you have a defined benefit pension and you are still in active service, still an active member of your scheme, the action required is different and more urgent. Request one specific document from your HR department or your pension scheme provider. Ask them to give you a written breakdown of exactly what your family would receive in 3 situations. If you died while still in pensionable service, if you left work and became a deferred member, and if you retired, started the pension, and then died. 3 columns: active member, deferred member, pension already in payment. Actual figures. Not summaries, not general guidance. The numbers that apply to your specific scheme, salary, service, and family circumstances. Most people have never seen this comparison laid out side by side. When you do see it, the gap between the two columns tends to be the moment the abstract becomes real. It is not about frightening yourself. It is about making a properly informed decision, which you cannot do if you have only ever seen half the picture. Neither of these steps commits you to anything. You do not have to retire tomorrow to build a cash buffer. You do not have to hand in your notice to request a death-in-service comparison. But both of them put you in a position where the decision, when you do make it, is based on what is actually true rather than what you assumed was true. That is the difference between a plan and a guess. Retirement is not a reward for endurance. It is not something you earn by staying until the last possible moment, and it is not a race to see how much you can spend in the first 5 years before your body slows down. It is, at its core, a question of control. When do you take back ownership of your time, and are you making that decision, or is something else making it for you? The market, if you wait too long to buffer against it. The scheme rules, if you stay in active service past the point where it is financially sensible. Your own hesitation if the identity question has not been separated from the financial one. All three of those forces will make the decision for you if you let them. None of them will make it in your favor. What the people who get this right tend to have in common is not a bigger pot or a better advisor. It is that they looked at the actual mechanics, the sequencing, the tax, the death-in-service rules, before they needed to, not in a panic. Just clearly, with enough time to do something about it. If this video has shifted something in how you are thinking about your own plan, the next step is not complicated. Check which category you are in. Drawdown pot or DB pension. Then take the one action that applies to you. Build the buffer or request the comparison. That is it. One thing. If you found this useful, subscribe. There is a lot more on how the UK retirement system actually works, as opposed to how most people assume it works. And drop a comment below. Are you managing a drawdown pension yourself, or do you have a DB scheme? I read them, and I do reply.